Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down. Alrighty, hello there, folks. Okay, we're back with part 2 of, Rocky Gregory is a piece of human refuse. Anyways, it gets worse today. I mean, Greg, I'll put it this way, folks. I know Rocky is a piece of crap. And I know that because, well, as Brian Bates is going to point out to you here today, is Rocky, on the Michelle Malkin special, told a lie. Now, what's interesting about that lie that he told is because that lie was to cover another, what you might call a lie of omission. Right? He was trying to explain why his official reports didn't contain the fact that Carla Rains had said she hadn't been the victim of an officer, hadn't been the victim of a sexual assault from an officer, about, well, somewhere between 7 and 9 times, as you were able to count on yesterday's video. Right? Okay. So, because that kept coming up on the Michelle Malkin special, he told a lie to try to explain it. We're going to see that today. You guys can be looking forward to that. So, yeah. I have no doubt that Rocky Gregory is just a terrible investigator. Horrible. Now, might it be that he had special cause to be so unethical in this investigation? That could be. That could be. There was some outside forces maybe putting pressure, but that doesn't excuse it. That may be like an explanation as to why this is happening, but it doesn't excuse it. So, this is going to be an interesting one, folks. Obviously, we're going into part 2 of the Carla Rains allegations here today. We're going to be going into looking in closer at what actually all happened in that interview. And Brian Bates obviously has gathered a lot of the background information to help put some of this into clarity. So, here we go, folks. Without further ado, Brian Bates.
In the last episode, I covered part 1 of accuser Carla Rains' allegations against then Oklahoma City Police Patrol Officer Daniel Holtzclaw. The majority of last episode was the audio from an interview recorded by Oklahoma City sex crimes detective Rocky Gregory and 41-year-old Northeast Oklahoma City resident Carla Rains. That interview took place on August 15th of 2014. And at Rains' mother's house in the 1300 block of Northeast 18th Street. That interview is only about 27 minutes long, but I would argue it's one of the most important interviews in this entire investigation, only second to Daniel Holtzclaw's interrogation interview. Why? Because to me, as someone who personally investigated this case, this interview answered so many questions about what was really going on. Both with Daniel Holtzclaw as a patrol officer prior to these allegations, and with the detectives investigating this case and how their investigative techniques manipulated the facts, the accusers, and allowed Holtzclaw to be falsely prosecuted and eventually convicted. But before I get into all of that, I want to first wrap up what Carla Rains' allegations actually are. Rains stated that at some point in the last year she was walking alone along Northeast 16th Street just west of North Fons Hill Avenue. She thought the time was around 10 p.m. She said that as she was walking, a newer model Oklahoma City patrol car passed her and then made a U-turn, pulled up to her, and stopped. The officer, who she stated she had never encountered previously and was later identified as Daniel Holtzclaw, exited his vehicle and began asking Rains the typical questions. Her name, where she was headed, where she was coming from, did she have any drugs on her, etc. Holtzclaw then reportedly did a quick pat search upon her before stating, quote, "I have to check you," end quote. Raines claims that at this point Holtzclaw made a motion for her to pull up her shirt. She told Detective Gregory that even though Holtzclaw didn't directly order her to do so, after she lifted her shirt, he allegedly twice told her, quote, "I need to make sure nothing is on you," end quote. Raines said she knew what that meant. She needed to lift her shirt up, and her bra too, thus exposing her breasts. She stated that the officer ran her name and that she came back clear for any outstanding warrants. Raines said that she simply wanted the stop to be over with as quickly as possible because she didn't want to be seen talking to a police officer and labeled a snitch. Before walking away, Raines said that Holtzclaw made another comment that, quote, "I go around and stop girls and people to make sure they are okay," end quote. Raines was clear. Officer Daniel Holtzclaw never touched her, never said anything blatantly inappropriate to her, and didn't actually ever specifically instruct her to expose herself. But that's not the biggest takeaway in this interview. It goes way deeper than that, and I'll begin to dissect the importance with my thoughts on what happened during her and Holtzclaw's encounter. For starters, regardless of Raines's memory, this wasn't the first time Holtzclaw had stopped her. Records show that they had run into each other on at least one previous occasion, July 10th, 2013, at about 6:15 p.m. I don't have any additional information regarding that stop, other than Holtzclaw ran Raines for warrants. It was determined by Detective Rocky Gregory that the date of the stop, in which Raines claims she exposed herself, took place on March 14th, 2014, and at around 11:20 at night. It was about 58 degrees that night, and she says she was wearing tight shorts, a t-shirt, a bra, and a jacket. She's on Northeast 16th Street in a high prostitution and drug area, and it is about a third of a mile from her mother's home, where she was living. Holtzclaw is in his patrol car. As he drives past Raines, he is suspicious that she is flagging cars. That's code word for a street prostitute who is trying to get a potential customer to stop and pick her up. According to Officer Holtzclaw's patrol car GPS, he was out at Northeast 16th and Fawns Hill for approximately 10 minutes, from 11:18 p.m. until 11:28 p.m.
All right, so I just want to point out there that you just heard that the stop was actually 10 minutes. And that's proven by Daniel's calls of Indo Dispatch, and along with his AVL data, both show that it was 10 minutes. So, all right.
He pulls up, stops, gets out of his patrol car, and goes through the usual routine when encountering someone on the street. Name, date of birth, what are you up to? At 11:20 p.m., Officer Holtzclaw calls into dispatch and advises them to stand by.
Friday, March 14, 2014, 23:20 and 49 seconds.
According to Raines, Holtzclaw has her expose her breasts prior to him actually running her for warrants. That means it would have had to have happened in the first 5 minutes or less from when he pulled up and stopped. In fact, it probably would have had to have happened between the time Officer Holtzclaw told dispatch to stand by and when he actually provided her name for the warrant search. 3 minutes later, at 11:23 p.m., Officer Holtzclaw relays Carla Raines' information to check her for warrants.
23 and 40 seconds.
I got one to run. Last name is Raines. Raines, correction, Raines. Robert Adam, Ida, Nora, Edward, Sam. First name is Carla. Charles Adam, Robert Lincoln Adam. Date of birth is 69, black female.
Friday, March 14, 2014, 23, 24
Robert
and
Adam,
0
Ida,
seconds.
Nora, Edward, Sam.
At approximately 11:27 p.m., dispatch comes back with the results of the warrant check.
Clear.
After Raines comes back clear for warrants, Holtzclaw releases her from investigative detention and according to his patrol car GPS, he leaves the scene and is moving again literally 60 seconds after talking to dispatch. So, what is Raines's actual allegation during those critical 3 minutes? She claims that after his initial questions, he turned all of his attention to whether or not she had any drugs on her. Raines says that she took it upon herself to raise her shirt and bra to the extent that her breasts became exposed. She claims she knew, or felt that she knew, that that is what Holtzclaw wanted her to do. When no drugs were found and she had no warrants, Holtzclaw released her from investigative detention to go on about her way as he continued his patrol shift. Now, to put this in perspective, Carla Raines's allegation of exposing herself, without being actually told to expose herself, will eventually result in a criminal charge that carries up to 10 years in prison and fines up to $20,000.
I want to take this opportunity to say again that I really am not putting the responsibility for this on these ladies. I'm a little saddened by the fact that they're going after Carla Raines for that. It's not, for me, it's not her fault. She is who she is, okay? And Rocky came along dangling this carrot, this, bait, and then was pushing. You'll see. I mean, as we continue to explain it here, as Brian continues to explain it here, you'll see that everything is manipulated by Rocky. It's this whole entire discussion with Carla Raines is manipulated by Rocky. So here we go. We'll move on.
But these allegations and the subsequent interview with Detective Rocky Gregory is actually much more than the he said, she said that many people think it is. As I mentioned earlier, this recorded interview answered critical nagging questions that I had when I first started investigating this case. Like, why are so many of these accusers all alleging they were made to expose themselves? How is it that detectives Rocky Gregory and Kim Davis seem to almost magically and effortlessly find accusers that otherwise had not come forward on their own? And how concerned should the public be that both detectives seem to randomly choose when they will record an interview and when they won't? And just how complete and unbiased are the resulting investigative reports? So let's now analyze Oklahoma sex crimes detective Rocky Gregory's role in accuser Carla Raines's interview. What is initially so troubling to me is when you compare his written report to the audio recording. The first glaring difference is that Gregory writes his report in a way to make it appear as if the recorded interview at Raines's mother's house is the first time they've actually ever spoken, when in fact, the audio recording makes it obvious that not only has Detective Gregory previously interviewed Raines, but that during that interview he seemed frustrated that he couldn't get Raines to tell him what he wanted to hear. Listen to it again.
Well, I didn't think I was kind of being clear about what I was asking. That's the reason I wanted to meet you face to face.
Yeah, because I ain't, like I said, I cleaned my life up, so I haven't been out on those streets. I haven't had this.
That's not at all how Detective Gregory's report reads. I've posted a copy of the official investigative report on this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com. The following is straight from that report. Quote, on 8/15/14, I met Carla at her residence at Northeast 18th. I had been trying to contact Carla through phone calls and by going by her residence leaving my card. End quote. There is no mention that he had asked her questions and that he wasn't getting the answers he wanted, and therefore that's why he decided to visit with her in person.
All I can say here is that they know that what they're doing is wrong. And how do you know that? How do I know that? How do you know that? We know that because Rocky himself knows that if he talks about having previous conversations with her and stuff, that it could taint the interview. And so he's misrepresenting it. He's leaving out the fact that he spoke to her previously. But it comes out in the interview anyway, obviously. But it's just interesting the way Rocky fills out his reports, because as you're going to hear Brian tell you, that although we out here web sleuths and stuff, we get into the audio and we get into the, and we read everything and we listen to it and watch everything, right? Well, when they're building a case, he explains how the head officers and the chief and the heads of the sex crime department and the prosecutors, they basically read these reports. Okay? So when Rocky Gregory is handing them a report that is leaving things out, that's problematic, obviously. But when he's leaving those things out, then they're not getting all that information. You see, so it's pretty wild. It's it's obvious to me that Rocky knows the things that he's doing are wrong. That's why he tries to lie to cover up his omission about the fact that she had said she wasn't a victim of a police officer so many times. He leaves that out. He omits it. And then when he's called out on it on Michelle Malkin's special, he tells another lie, which you're going to see disproven here today. All right, let's move on.
The second, and in my opinion, even more egregious discrepancy, is the fact that nowhere in Detective Gregory's official report does it ever mention that Raines denied being the victim of Daniel Holtzclaw or any other Oklahoma City police officer. And it's not like she only denied it once. She denies being a victim no less than 7 times. Listen again to a string of several denials in the opening minutes of her recorded interview.
Have you ever come to any contact where an officer has been inappropriate?
No.
Have you ever had to expose yourself to them?
No.
Okay.
But, because I don't be on the streets no more. I don't do drugs and all that kind of stuff. See, I don't.
But you wasn't asked to, if you had any drugs on you, anything like that, and you had to
expose myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, an officer, was it this year? No. I haven't had. How did you get my name anyway on something like this?
These 2 examples alone prove that not only should every interview with an accuser or alleged victim be recorded, but that when those interviews are not recorded, we absolutely cannot trust the written accounts of the detectives in charge of this investigation.
And I think that's a pretty accurate assessment. Amen.
In fact, we can't even trust the written reports when the interview is recorded. Keep in mind, it's these written reports that are reviewed by the higher-ups within the police department and prosecutors within the district attorney's office. They often don't even listen to the recordings, if one is even made available until right before trial, if ever at all. Why? Because there is a certain level of professionalism, trust, and fairness that is expected of those conducting these types of investigations. Investigations that literally leave defendants fighting for their freedom. These 2 examples I just gave you prove that Detective Rocky Gregory cannot be trusted with such a high degree of transparency, fairness, and ethics. And what's more troubling is that since this trial, Detective Gregory has been promoted to the homicide unit, where the stakes are even higher. His bias and lack of transparency can literally cost an innocent defendant their life.
So, how many more wrongful convictions are we possibly going to see now that Rocky Gregory is working homicide? Oh, goodness. Oh, my goodness. Rocky Gregory working homicide. Unbelievable.
You'll recall in accuser Terry Morris's allegations, Detective Gregory made claims in his report that were not to be found anywhere in his recorded interviews with Morris. The same can be said about specifics contained in Detective Kim Davis's official investigative reports that don't match the recorded interviews. But I want to come back to this case and what this recording tells us about what Patrol Officer Daniel Holtzclaw is doing and not doing while out on patrol. Up to this point, we are 7 accusers in, or just over half of the 13 that will eventually lead to criminal charges. Of these 7, the allegations range greatly, from burglary, the alleged unauthorized entry into Tabitha Barnes's home, to groping or oral and/or vaginal sex. But the most common allegation amongst all 7 accusers is the assertion that Officer Holtzclaw illegally forced them to expose themselves. Specifically, accusers Janie Liggins, Terry Morris, Tabitha Barnes, and Carla Raines, with accusers Sherry Ellis, Florine Mathis, and Carla Johnson all alleging their breasts were touched to some degree, all under the guise of searching for drugs or illegal contraband. I do think Officer Holtzclaw was searching these women's breast area for those items, because it's a common hiding place. But as I've mentioned previously in other episodes, I think he was doing it as he's been instructed by higher-ranking officers and members of the gang unit, a unit he served on as a very new Oklahoma City police officer. And, as I've said before, that search technique has a name. Detective Gregory alluded to the name back in episode 2 during Officer Holtzclaw's interrogation regarding the Janie Liggins stop. He refers to it as the Shake. Have a listen.
Run down through on your search of her breasts again. You searched her with her, where was her, was she facing you or facing away?
Facing away.
She's facing away.
Yeah.
And how are you seeing if anything's falling, if she's facing away?
If it'd fall, I would see right there.
You'd see right there, but don't you usually have them turn face towards you and do a shakeout?
Officer safety, always have everyone face away from me.
Okay, what I want to stop and point out here is, did you, obviously, what you heard Rocky asking him, did you have her facing you? Obviously, Rocky wants that because he wants Daniel to have been checking her out. It goes along with the whole narrative, right? But did you hear what Daniel said? No, I always have him face away. Do you notice what he said, though? I mean, very interesting. Officer safety. That tells me that that's most likely something that is common at OKCPD. For him to say it, officer safety, to have them face away, that tells me, just like the clasp and shake is an kind of not talked about maneuver, I have a feeling that it's also a not talked about maneuver to minimize the amount of complaints they might get for the officers to have them face away, obviously. And then whatever hits the ground, they will see. So that's for me, that's my takeaway. When I hear Daniel say officer safety, that tells me that that's most likely something that all the officers do, all the male officers do, to minimize their risk in this unspoken of, obviously questionable maneuver, which is clearly taught to OKCPD officers, right? Okay, let's move on.
Did you tell her how far to raise her shirt or to do the shake with the bra?
However, in Raines' interview, he actually calls it by its formal name, the clasp and shake. That unfortunate and unimaginable request by an Oklahoma City police officer to have a female clasp her bra from on top of her shirt, pull it away from her breasts, and shake, all with the intent to dislodge anything hidden underneath the breast tissue. But this term has so far only been coined in this investigation by Detective Rocky Gregory, meaning he knows about this procedure. He knows that even though it doesn't appear in any official police policy manual, it's commonly taught to officers, and he knows it has a name, the clasp and shake.
Did you have your breasts exposed?
Yeah, you have to. You have to. You have to raise your shirt up, take the inside of your bra and raise it up, and so he said make sure ain't nothing.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
I know what you're talking about.
That's the clasp and shake.
I firmly believe That's what Officer Holtzclaw was doing while on patrol when he encountered individuals that he knew or highly suspected were drug addicts and most likely had drugs or drug paraphernalia on them. In fact, even Carla Raines initially dismisses this as, quote, the routine.
Okay.
In my bra.
So you raise your shirt.
Raise my shirt
What's
up
the
right
next
here.
thing he asks?
Nothing. So I had to raise my shirt up right here because I know the routine.
Now, I would say there's further proof of the clasp and shake being a normal thing because you have Carla Raines herself basically telling you, yeah, it's a normal thing. You know, it's expected. This is basically the way she's saying it, right? Or she knows what it is, at least. She's encountered it enough times to know what it is. So, right. Okay, let's move on.
It's only after denying being a victim of any officer 7 times and then being told by Detective Gregory that he's seeking a really bad guy and that there's lots of victims does Raines start to come around. Here's how Detective Gregory described that revelation with Carla Raines during an interview with conservative commentator, author, and investigative reporter Michelle Mulkin after Officer Holtzclaw's trial.
I just simply asked her, I'm like, hey, I'm investigating a situation. Have, you ever been, had any issues with any officers? And in the beginning, she said no, but her grandma was there. And then there at the end, she's like, hey, hang on a second. Can we talk privately? I'm like, sure. So we step over to the side, and she's like, well, there was one incident, and then she goes into that she was stopped and she had to expose her breast to an officer, and she tried to describe as best she could, and then I verified, it was Daniel, and that's kind of how it went. She did say no in the beginning, but it was because she didn't want her grandma to hear it, and we
Did she tell you that?
I spoke with her a couple times. I know that she kind of alluded. I just knew that that's what the reason was when she said she wanted to speak in private.
So she had basically denied several times that she was a victim. You're saying it's because she didn't want her grandma to know?
Yes,
And you're assuming that, or she told you that?
Well, I just in speaking with her, I did gather that because she wanted to speak in private. At the time, I could tell she was really nervous. She's had a past history, getting stopped by the police. She had that normal history with officers, she had that normal past history of, drugs and everything else like we've been seeing, and. I kind of gained rapport with her, and I think she felt more comfortable that's why she took me aside, and we spoke alone, and she told me what happened.
Did you catch that spin? And once again, he is completely deviating from what is crystal clear in his recorded interview with accuser Carla Raines. Detective Gregory claims that Raines only initially and 7 times denied being a victim because her mother, whom he wrongly keeps identifying as her grandmother, was within earshot during that part of their interview, and she didn't want to talk about it around her. Let's hear what she actually said again so we can put it into context.
Well, this is the deal. We've got several victims.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so we're trying to go back on this guy, and he's a pretty bad guy.
Was he addressing himself as an officer or prostitution?
In Oklahoma.
Do what?
Oklahoma. All these white folks is crazy. No good.
As far as, because I haven't really been on the streets and stuff that much. So, but I know what you're talking about. I just couldn't really talk in front of her, but I know what you're talking about as far as, but I haven't, what you mean expose yourself as far as like ask for prostitution or?
Not even necessarily for prostitutes, but he's having women do different things.
Oh, thinking they gonna go to jail if they do a favor for him, he wouldn't.
There you go.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Within the past year, I really can't really recall.
Now, when I listen to that, I don't hear any pulling aside or hushed tones or anything like that. In fact, I hear Carla Raines almost what seems to be a bit of an excitement in her voice. Which is, strange. I don't know what that exactly means, or at least I'm not willing to offer an opinion on what that might mean. But she seems to be getting a little bit excited, or a little bit interested, I guess, maybe, in what he's saying, because she just seems to take a little bit more of an interest at that point. Now, what's important here is that transition happens, and there's no pulling aside, there's no hushed tones, afraid that mom's going to hear, none of that. And so it makes Rocky's claim on Michelle Malkin complete bogus crap. You know what I mean? It's a lie. It's a full-on lie. It's a lie to cover up a lie of omission. Okay? How do you know they're doing wrong? How do you know they were doing wrong? Because they're lying to cover up their lies or their omissions. That's how they know they were doing wrong. Because they know they have to lie to cover those things that they did wrong up. Right? All right. Let's move on.
It should be very clear. Detective Gregory is lying. Or at the very least, his bias against Officer Daniel Holtzclaw is so strong he can no longer be objective about any aspect of this investigation. Raines wasn't afraid to speak in front of her mother. If that was truly the case, then what's his excuse for why she didn't tell him more details when they talked privately on the phone? It's very obvious to me in this recorded interview that Raines is simply trying to figure out what the hell Detective Gregory is talking about. It's only after Detective Gregory spoon feeds her enough details that she simply regurgitates what she thinks he wants to hear. And to be quite honest, I think much of what she says is actually true to some extent. She was stopped by Officer Holtzclaw. She was run for warrants, and he did what she considers to be routine. He had her do the clasp and shake.
So you raise your shirt
Right here.
to
Right here.
just above the breast.
Right above my breast. And I had to take my bra because my breast
now
fell
what?
out.
Do I think some of these women lifted their shirts higher than necessary? Yes. Do I think some of these women's breasts fell below their shirt line once they were no longer being supported by their bra? Yes. Do I think any of that was done with malicious, illegal, or sexually gratifying intent? 100% no. It's obvious when you listen to Raines' interview that even she didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary until Detective Gregory made her feel that it was. Again, Carla Raines.
So I had to raise my shirt up, raise my bra up, and shake it out. And he talked to me about 45 minutes, and then he let me go.
If you go back through her interview, she must recount doing the clasp and shake at least 4 or 5 times, and she waffles back and forth between being told to expose herself to ultimately admitting she just quote-unquote knew that's what she needed to do.
Now, I do find it interesting to see that Carla Raines, when trying to explain why, obviously when she hadn't received a direct order to do it from Daniel, why she was struggling to explain why she had lifted it all the way up and done all those things, right? She was now struggling to try to explain why, right? And so her answer is she just knew, right? She could see it on the officer's face, or whatever. It was just some inexplicable thing, some nod and a wink, type of thing that happened, right? You know what I mean? And she's saying that. And what I find funny is that Rocky Gregory, when he's telling the lie about how she pulled him aside and because she didn't want her mom to hear, and Michelle Malkin's asking her, like, how do you know that? Did she tell you that she didn't want her mom to hear or whatever? And he's just like, oh, no, I could kind of just tell from the way that she was acting. I could just tell from the look on her face. I could just tell from, blah, 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 blah. He goes on, right? That's what I find is so similar about Rocky's and her story at those moments, right? That they're both basically trying to claim that they could read it on somebody's face, that's what was going on, right? So, all right. Anyways, let's move on.
She also claims this entire interaction took 45 minutes. In reality, we know from patrol car GPS it was only 10 minutes or possibly slightly less than that. One last thing, did you catch it? Before Raines realized she needed to focus in on when Daniel Holtzclaw stopped her, she did implicate a different officer for wrongdoing. But Detective Gregory steered her away from that. And just like accuser Sherry Ellis, Carla Raines implicated a black Oklahoma City police officer.
There's only one officer that I know a few years back. He's, this was before OU was only going to 16th Street and back. He was a black cop. They used to come around here, but like you say, he got stopped by him, but he didn't question me. But he's just like, I've seen a girl that exposed her breast to him before, but as far as him threatening to arrest somebody or I've never seen that before, but.
Okay, I think that covers that. I just didn't think I was being clear on the phone when we talked.
You was being quite clear, but like I said, that's the only time that I had that happen to me when I was on the south side. And we couldn't say that I was prosecuting because I wasn't. I was at the gas station.
On the
deal. And he exposed himself to me. That was a black officer. I guess they was doing some type of sting or whatever.
Sting, yeah, advice.
Yeah.
This brings up two interesting points. One, Raines is now the second accuser to implicate a black Oklahoma City police officer in wrongdoing in this investigation.
Now, I don't mean to, have a bone to pick with Brian here, but by my count, it's 3. Okay, because we have Terry Morris, who claims a black officer in a black and white patrol car had assaulted her. We had Sherry Ellis, who also claimed that the officer that assaulted her was black. In fact, the officer that patrolled within a very, very close distance of the spot where she was assaulted ended up after Daniel's trial and stuff, ended up getting busted in a human trafficking thing, bust. So interesting things. But now here we are with a third. I believe it's a third. I don't know if Brian maybe made a mistake there, but for me this is the third one. Because you have Terry Morris, you have Sherry Ellis, and now you have, obviously, Carla Raines. So, just wanted to jump in and say that.
And 2, Detective Gregory realizes what Raines is talking about. She's talking about another disgusting reality of acceptable Oklahoma City police procedure that is conveniently not discussed publicly. That officers are allowed, even encouraged, to expose themselves to women and have women get completely naked and expose themselves and even touch officers while they're working undercover, even though those women at that point haven't done anything illegal. Yet, Detective Gregory is trying to railroad Officer Holtzclaw when he simply initiates another accepted, though not discussed, police procedure: the clasp and shake. There will be more examples of Detective Rocky Gregory and Kim Davis's questionable investigative techniques in future episodes. But this is where I'm going to stop this episode. If you'd like to see 360-degree photos of where Carla Raines and Officer Daniel Holtzclaw encountered each other, along with maps, police reports, and a transcript of this episode, I encourage you to check out this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com.
Alrighty there, folks. That wraps up the allegations of Carla Raines. Now, obviously, you can see there are plenty of issues here. The fact that she was initially saying no, she had never been assaulted, but then eventually kind of flip-flopping, but then coming up with this weak kind of story, which it seems pretty obvious she was asked to do a clasp and shake and just went way too far with it for whatever reason. She went way too far with it. And she was trying to make that into something maybe that it really wasn't. And I say that, and again, I say I don't blame these ladies for it. I don't. I blame the investigators for dangling the bait. It's their fault. It's the investigators' fault for dangling the bait, because these people are in, obviously, the low-income areas. They're just, you dangle a piece of bait where they could potentially have a civil suit against an Oklahoma City police officer. They're looking at dollar signs. I mean, honestly. So I really can't hold it against them or fault these ladies for being who they are and doing what they honestly, there's no shock in the fact that they would try to cash in on it. It's the detectives' fault, because the detectives were dangling the bait and making it so easy for them to do it. The detectives should have been there to mitigate this. The detectives should have been the one going, wait, okay, these stories aren't coming out the right way. Now, it could be because of the outside pressure that was going on. So there was a lot of things going on, and there was a lot of moving parts in this, but ultimately, justice is justice, and these detectives were not doing their job properly. Certainly, Rocky Gregory just is absolutely detestable. Absolutely detestable. He is clearly steering the women that he interviews into the stories that he wants. So, alright folks, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.